"You are my daddy." The childish voice ripped through the elegant silence of the boardroom, like a stone dropped into a glass lake. For a second, no one understood what had happened. The executives around the enormous marble table stopped talking. Fingers typing on laptops hung suspended in the air. The screens displaying financial charts remained lit, the numbers blinking indifferently, and the most powerful man on Victoria Island became completely motionless because a little girl had just run across the room and was hugging his legs. The man's name was Chief Emeka Okoro. To the business world, he was known as the Iron Chief, a ruthless billionaire who had built one of Nigeria's largest real estate empires. Anyone who read the business pages knew. The Okoro Group had commercial towers in Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt, residential estates from Ikoyi to Lekki, and a reputation for clinical precision in negotiations that made competitors retreat before even sitting down at the table. The newspapers said he had nerves of steel. Investors said he never lost control. His employees knew that a single glare from him was capable of freezing an entire room. There was a silent joke in the corridors of Okoro Towers, the group's headquarters on Victoria Island, that the thermometer dropped 2 degrees when Chief Emeka entered the elevator. It wasn't a joke of affection. It was an observation from those who had learned over time that smiling near the boss was an unnecessary risk. But at that moment, Chief Emeka Okoro didn't know what to do. The little girl hugged him with all the strength of her small arms. Her simple dress, washed so many times, its color had faded at the edges. Her small shoes were worn at the sole, the leather peeling at the tip of the right foot. Her dark hair was tied in 2 crooked braids, probably done in a hurry that morning, with one of the ribbons almost loose. She seemed completely out of place in that hall, full of men in Italian suits, with the imported marble table and leather chairs that cost more than many people earned in 3 months. "You are my daddy," she repeated. A murmur ran around the boardroom table. One of the directors dropped his pen. The metallic sound echoed through the hall, like an off-key note in a symphony. Another executive leaned forward in disbelief, because everyone there knew something about Chief Emeka Okoro. He never had children, not even during his marriage. A marriage that ended 5 years earlier, when his wife died in an accident on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway on a drizzly afternoon. The kind of accident that doesn't make headlines, but destroys everything inside. Since then, Chief Emeka had shut himself off in his work. He didn't attend social events, didn't participate in parties, didn't allow anyone to get too close. The mansion where he lived in Ikoyi was famous for its silence. Employees said the corridors looked like a museum, a place where joy had been forbidden by decree, where every painting, every vase, every object was in its right place and stayed there motionless, fulfilling a decorative function that warmed nothing until now, because the little girl kept hugging his legs. "Daddy," Chief Emeka finally reacted, slowly lowering his gaze and, for the first time in many years, his eyes showed something different. Confusion. "Little girl," he said in a deep voice, choosing his words with the same care he used to draft a contractual clause. "I think you are mistaken." But the little one shook her head. She didn't seem scared, didn't seem nervous, didn't seem like a child who had accidentally entered the wrong place. She just seemed certain, with that absolute certainty that only very young children still manage to have before the world begins to teach them to doubt everything. "I am not mistaken." The executives began to look towards the door, and then the palest woman in the entire company appeared, the new cleaner. Her name was Adana Okori. She had started working at the mansion only 2 weeks ago. She was a woman with a beautiful but tired face, with dark circles under her eyes that told a story of sleepless nights, of bills calculated in dim light, of decisions made alone, with no one to share the burden. Her hands had that specific roughness of someone who works with water and cleaning products every day. When she saw her daughter in the middle of the most important boardroom in Okoro Towers, her heart almost stopped. "Chioma!" she exclaimed in a trembling voice. The little girl turned her head. "Mummy, look, I found my daddy." The silence that followed was even more uncomfortable than the previous one. Adana ran to her daughter and gently took her by the arm, trying not to look too desperate, trying to maintain what little composure she had left. "I am so very sorry, sir," she said with a broken voice. "She doesn't know what she's saying." She tried to pull her away, but Chioma wouldn't let go of the billionaire's suit. "But mummy, he looks like the daddy I drew." The phrase was so innocent that no one knew how to react. It was the kind of thing a child says without knowing it's shattering the air around them. One of the executives cleared his throat uncomfortably. Another murmured something about security, about how that kind of failure in access control was unacceptable in a building of Okoro Towers standard. But Chief Emeka raised a hand, a unique gesture. his open palm facing the room, and everyone obeyed without thinking. 20 years of authority distilled into a single gesture. His gaze remained fixed on the little girl. "Why do you say, 'I am your father'?" Chioma looked at him with the naturalness of a child, talking about something obvious, like the sky being blue or rain making things wet. "Because when I saw you, I felt like I already knew you." The room fell completely silent, because those words were not an accusation, were not a calculated lie, were not the trick of someone trying to take advantage of a situation. They were simply the truth from the heart of a 6-year-old girl, raw, unfiltered, without malice, impossible to refute with logic. Adana was on the verge of tears. "Sir, please forgive me. She doesn't have a father. She never knew him. Sometimes, she imagines things. I know it was an absurd situation. I understand. If you want to dismiss me right now," but before she could finish the sentence, Chioma raised her head and said something no one expected. "I'm not imagining." She looked directly at Chief Emeka. "Parents aren't always the ones we are born with." She paused briefly. That pause carried weight. Sometimes they are the ones who appear when we need them most. And in that instant, for the first time in 5 years, something inside Chief Emeka Okoro's frozen heart stirred. It wasn't love yet, no, but it was something he hadn't felt in a very long time: curiosity. During the seconds that followed the girl's words, no one in the boardroom moved. The executives remained seated around the enormous marble table, but the meeting had completely lost its way. The presentations on the monitors continued to run on their own. Growth charts, market projections, comparative tables that at that hour were of no importance whatsoever. No one was paying attention to any of it. Everyone was looking at Chief Emeka Okoro, the man who never allowed interruptions, the man whose schedule timed every 15 minutes, the man who could dismiss someone just for speaking out of turn. And yet, there he was, with a little girl hugging his suit, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Adana Okori was on the verge of panic. "Sir, please forgive me," she said in a trembling voice, trying to control her breathing. "She doesn't understand where she is. I don't know how she managed to get in here. I swear I didn't know. I was on the 3rd floor when she tried to separate her daughter." Chioma hugged the billionaire's leg again. "Mummy, wait." Chief Emeka lowered his gaze again. There was something strange about the situation that he couldn't name. The girl didn't seem to be acting on a whim. She wasn't a spoiled child, throwing a tantrum for attention. There was no shame in her eyes, no fear. There was only a childish certainty that disconcerted him in a way no business adversary had managed in 20 years of his career. "How did you get in here?" he finally asked. Chioma replied with total naturalness, as if the answer were obvious. The door was open. One of the executives murmured, "Security should check that urgently," but Chief Emeka raised his hand. The room immediately fell silent again. Adana no longer knew what to do with her hands. "Sir, I promise on all that is sacred that this will not happen again. If you give me another chance, I guarantee that." But Chief Emeka was not looking at her. He continued to observe the little girl with an attention that seemed of another order. Not the attention of someone evaluating a problem to solve, but of someone who found something they didn't expect to find. "What did you say your name was?" "Chioma. And how old are you?" The girl proudly held up 6 fingers. 6. One of the directors discreetly leaned towards his colleague next to him and murmured, "This is ridiculous," but no one dared to say it out loud, because something was happening there before them. Something none of them expected to see in their entire professional lives. Chief Emeka Okoro was genuinely talking to the little girl. "Chioma," he finally said, in a voice softer than anyone in that room had ever heard from him. "I am not your father." The girl tilted her head to the side. She thought for a few seconds with that concentrated seriousness children have when they are truly pondering something important. And then she responded with a logic so simple and so absolute that it left everyone speechless. "That's what you think." 2 executives let out a nervous, almost involuntary laugh, and then immediately regretted it. But Chief Emeka didn't laugh. His eyes remained fixed on the girl, with an expression no one there knew how to interpret. "Why do you think so?" Chioma looked around the room at the men in suits, at the imposing chairs, at the screens with charts she certainly didn't understand. "Because everyone here is scared of you." The comment was so direct that several men visibly shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Some looked away. Others suddenly studied their own ID badges with inexplicable interest. The girl looked back at the billionaire, "But I'm not." Chief Emeka felt something strange in his chest, a small but real thing. For years, people around him had treated him with respect or with fear. Employees who calculated every word before speaking, directors with fake smiles when he entered the room, investors who agreed with everything even when they disagreed internally. But no one in years had spoken to him that way, with total honesty, without calculating the risk, without wanting anything in return. "And why are you not scared of me?" Chioma smiled, and her smile was of a cutting simplicity. "Because a daddy doesn't scare." The silence that followed was deep and long, the kind of silence that is not empty, but full. Adana was completely mortified, her face red, wishing the marble floor would open up and swallow her along with her daughter. "Sir, please," but Chief Emeka raised his hand again, then turned to the executives with a definitive expression. "The meeting is adjourned." The words surprised everyone. "But, Chief, tomorrow's contract needs approval before." Chief Emeka's tone allowed no discussion. It was the tone that ended conversations, dissolved objections, made the matter non-existent. The men slowly began to rise, gathering their papers and laptops with careful movements, as if making noise could be dangerous. As they filed out awkwardly, they couldn't help but look once more at the little girl, who had interrupted the most important meeting of the month. When the door closed, only 3 people remained: Chief Emeka, Adana, and Chioma. The silence between them was of a different quality, more intimate, more vulnerable. Adana bowed her head. "Sir, I know this was a grave fault. If you want to dismiss me, I understand completely. I won't hold a grudge. I just ask that you give me a reference, because I have my daughter to raise." "And where does her father live?" Chief Emeka's question was direct, addressed to Chioma. The girl answered with a naturalness that disarmed any strategy. "I don't have one, Daddy." Adana closed her eyes for a moment. It was a conversation she had tried to avoid for years, with school teachers, with curious neighbors, with her own daughter, on nights when Chioma asked why her classmate had a daddy and she didn't. "Her father left when she was very little," Adana explained in a low voice, looking away. "Since then, it's just been the 2 of us. I do what I can." Chioma looked back at Chief Emeka. "That's why, when I saw you, I thought it could be you." Chief Emeka felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't exactly sadness. It was something deeper, a feeling he had carefully buried along with memories of his wife, along with the plans they had made and could never fulfill. He was 42, with a fortune he couldn't spend, a house too big, and a capacity to feel that he had put in a box and stored in a place he thought he wouldn't need to open again. Adana took her daughter's hand. "Come, Chioma, we've bothered him enough." The girl walked a few steps towards the door, but stopped. She turned once more to the billionaire. "You know something, Chief Emeka?" He raised his gaze, without correcting the informal address that in any other circumstance would be unthinkable. "What?" The girl smiled. "Even if you're not my daddy, I think you need one." Chief Emeka became completely still, because no one, in years, ever, under any circumstances, had dared to say such a thing to him. And as the girl left the boardroom hand in hand, with her mother, her little steps echoing down the marble corridor, for the first time in a long time, the corridors of Okoro Towers ceased to seem completely empty. When the boardroom door closed behind Adana and Chioma, silence returned to the building. But it was no longer the same silence. For years, that place had been governed by perfect order. Employees walked carefully through the corridors, knowing that making unnecessary noise was a way to attract unwanted attention. Assistants spoke in low voices. Meetings started promptly and ended when the boss decided they were over. It was a silence of discipline, the kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from fear. Now it was a silence of a different nature, a silence filled with a question no one dared to formulate aloud. Chief Emeka remained standing by the marble table, his eyes fixed on the door through which the little girl had left. The phrase kept repeating in his mind, like a song that sticks without permission. "I think you need a daddy." No one had spoken to him like that in years. Not the executives who spent all day around him, nor the employees who greeted him every morning with that professional smile of someone being paid to smile, nor even the few he still called friends. If he could even call friends the people who surrounded him, who called occasionally for lunch and talked business, pretending they were talking about friendship. Finally, Chief Emeka walked to the office window. From there, he could see all of Lagos that he had helped build commercial towers that existed because he had signed the contracts, residential estates that carried the Okoro name on construction signs and deeds, business centers in Ikoyi, condominiums in Lekki, projects coming to fruition in Victoria Island and Maryland. It was a city, partly his, and it was completely empty because while observing that landscape that represented 20 years of work, Chief Emeka remembered something he had long avoided: the silence of his own house. The mansion in Ikoyi was enormous. It had 12 rooms, of which he used one. Halls full of furniture chosen by a decorator he never saw again after the delivery. Gardens perfectly manicured by staff who arrived at 6 in the morning and left before lunch. A heated swimming pool that hadn't been used since before his wife's death. All the staff treated that house as an obligation. They arrived, did their service, left. No one left a trace. No one left noise. No one left anything to indicate that a human being had passed through there. After his wife's death, Chief Emeka had stopped living. He had simply continued working. The assistant's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Sir," he turned slowly like someone who has just returned from a long internal journey. "Yes, Mrs. Okori is waiting in the corridor." Chief Emeka frowned slightly. "Why?" "She says she wants to apologize once more, that she needs you to know she didn't orchestrate anything, that Chioma left without her knowing." For a moment, he thought of saying no, but something inside stopped him. The same thing that had prevented him from sending the girl away immediately when she ran into the room. "Send her in." The assistant hesitated for a second, because that was unusual. Receiving the cleaner in the executive office was not in any protocol, but Chief Emeka's expression left no room for questioning. "Yes, sir." A minute later, Adana Okori entered the office with nervous steps, like someone crossing a minefield trying to step only on safe stones. Chioma was by her side, holding her little hand. The girl looked at everything with enormous curiosity. The billionaire's office was indeed another world. A solid wood desk, the size of a car, elegant paintings on the walls, black and white aerial photographs of Lagos framed in brushed metal, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a living panorama that changed with every hour of the day. There was a bookshelf that occupied the entire wall, full of books ranging from the floor to almost the ceiling. Books on business, architecture, history, philosophy. Some looked new, others clearly had been read many times, with bent spines and forgotten bookmarks between the pages. "Chief Emeka," Adana said quickly, with that voice of someone who rehearsed the words in the corridor and still isn't confident in them. "I'm truly sorry for what happened. I don't know how Chioma managed." Chief Emeka did not answer immediately. He observed the girl. Chioma had let go of her mother's hand and was walking slowly along the bookshelf, reading the titles with that serious concentration of a child, still learning to decipher letters. "Are all these books yours?" "They are." "Did you read all of them?" Chief Emeka hesitated. "Not all." The girl smiled. A smile from someone who had just discovered that the scariest adult in the world also has a weakness. "My mummy says books are like friends. The more you have, the less lonely you are." Adana looked at her nervously. "Chioma, please, you don't have to." But Chief Emeka raised his hand. "Let her speak." Adana closed her mouth. Chief Emeka looked back at the girl with different attention, as if he were hearing something he hadn't heard in a long time. "Do you like books?" Chioma nodded with enormous enthusiasm, her head bobbing up and down several times. "Very much. But we don't have many at home because books are expensive." She said it with the same naturalness with which she said everything, without wanting to cause embarrassment, without asking for anything. It was just a fact, like the sun being hot or the rain being wet. Adana felt her stomach clench, but Chief Emeka didn't seem uncomfortable. He looked at the girl for a moment, then followed her gaze to the bookshelf. Then, Chioma walked to the window and stopped completely. "Wow." Her eyes widened, her forehead almost touching the cold glass. "From here, it looks like you're the king of Lagos." Chief Emeka couldn't help a small reaction. It wasn't exactly a smile, but it was the closest to a smile he had come in years. A slight relaxation of his lips, a small thing that changed the entire architecture of his face. Adana noticed this, and it surprised her more than anything else, because everyone in the company knew Chief Emeka Okoro didn't smile. It was a fact as established as the company's address or its registration number. "You know something, Chief Emeka?" He raised an eyebrow. "What?" The girl turned to him with total naturalness. "Your office is very beautiful." She looked around, examining every detail with the eyes of someone making a careful inventory. The paintings, the desk, the books, the plants in the corner, the light coming through the immense windows. Then she added with absolute sincerity and without any cruelty, "But it's very sad." The comment left Adana completely paralyzed. "Chioma." But Chief Emeka didn't seem irritated. He seemed thoughtful, in the same way he becomes thoughtful when someone presents a fact that contradicts a premise he had taken for granted. "Why do you say that?" The girl answered without hesitating for a second. "Because no one laughs here." Silence once again filled the office, but this time it was different, because Chief Emeka Okoro was beginning to understand something he hadn't wanted to see for years. something he had hidden under spreadsheets and meetings and contracts and targets and quarter-on-quarter results. It wasn't the office that was sad, it was him. And for the first time since his wife's death, someone had had the courage to say it. Not a therapist, not a childhood friend, not someone who had known him for decades. A 6-year-old girl who had walked in through the wrong door on an important meeting day and had told him the simplest truth in the world. Chief Emeka looked at Chioma for a few seconds. Then he said something that surprised even Adana. "Would you like to come back tomorrow?" The girl's eyes widened with enormous enthusiasm. "Here in your office?" Chief Emeka nodded slowly. "Yes." Chioma smiled, and that smile lit up the office more than all the ceiling lights combined. Because without knowing it, a 6-year-old girl had just begun to change the life of the coldest man in the city. The next day, something strange happened in Chief Emeka Okoro's perfectly organized routine. For years, his mornings had been exactly the same. Black coffee without sugar, 2 cups, absolute silence. The daily business newspaper open on the kitchen counter, but rarely truly read, more as a ritual than a necessity. A way to fill the time between waking up and having to face the day. The car waiting at the mansion entrance at 7:30 sharp. Pa James, the old butler who had worked for the Okoro family for 23 years, already knew every detail of that routine by heart. The grey suit on Mondays and Wednesdays, the navy blue on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the black reserved for Fridays, when there were more formal meetings with external partners. He knew Chief Emeka drank his coffee standing, leaning against the kitchen counter, looking out the window at the garden. He knew he didn't like conversation in the morning. He knew the silence wasn't rudeness, it was a necessity. In 23 years, Pa James had learned to read his employer without him needing to speak. He knew when he was in a hurry, he knew when he was worried, he knew when the day's agenda was too heavy to fit within the allotted time. And he knew that morning that something was different. Chief Emeka had been standing in the kitchen for too long. He wasn't reading the newspaper, he wasn't checking his phone, he was simply looking out the window at the garden, at the trees, at the small pond, at the wooden bench by the water, with that expression of someone remembering something he had kept hidden away. Pa James waited in the corridor with the discretion his position required. Finally, Chief Emeka placed the cup on the counter. "James, sir, today, we'll have a visitor." The butler inclined his head slightly. "What time should I prepare?" "Mrs. Okori's daughter." A pause. Pa James was a man of few facial expressions, which had been honed by time and his position. But at that moment, something crossed his face that wasn't exactly surprise. It was a contained satisfaction. The kind one keeps to avoid seeming impertinent. "Understood, sir. I will prepare the garden." Chief Emeka looked at him. "Also prepare a snack. Children like those things." Pa James smiled slowly, discreetly, the way he himself allowed himself on rare occasions. "Yes, sir." "With pleasure." An hour later, Adana Okori stood at the main entrance of the mansion, her heart beating faster than she could control. The house, seen up close, was even more imposing than it appeared from the iron gate. 2 floors of light stone with dark wood details, an impeccable entrance garden, with a row of royal palm trees marking the path to the door, like a vegetal guard of honor. Stone fountains murmured a constant music, and a general quietness that had something of a museum about it, exactly as the staff described. "Chioma," Adana whispered, holding her daughter's hand a little tighter than necessary. "We need to behave very well, okay? Don't touch anything without asking. Don't run inside the house. Don't ask questions about things that are not our business." "I understand, Mummy. And don't call him Daddy or King or any other name you invent on the spot." Chioma considered this for a moment. "What if he asks me what I want to call him?" Adana closed her eyes briefly. "Chief Emeka, or Sir, but respectfully." The girl nodded, but with that expression of someone agreeing to end the conversation, rather than from deep conviction. The door opened before Adana could ring the bell. Pa James appeared in an immaculate suit, and that air of serene dignity, developed only after decades of serving carefully and with genuine respect. "Good morning, Mrs. Okori." Adana lowered her head. "Good morning, Pa James." The butler looked at the girl, and the corner of his eyes crinkled slightly, the way it happens when someone truly smiles but is trying to be professional. "And you must be." The girl smiled with all the strength she had. "Chioma. Chief Emeka is in the backyard garden. You may follow me." They walked down the main corridor, white marble, indirect lighting, framed photographs on the walls documenting decades of the Okoro Group's history. Inaugurated works, acquired land, buildings under construction that today were skyscrapers with the Okoro name engraved on the facade. Chioma looked at everything. When they reached the backyard garden, the girl stopped completely. The space was enormous, a grassy area large enough for a football game. Smaller fountains distributed at strategic points, trees of different species, a yellow iroko in the corner, a mango tree at the back, a tall and solitary cypress near the wall, creating generous shaded niches, a small artificial pond with golden and red carp swimming among broad-leaved aquatic plants, and further back, almost hidden by a purple flowering creeper that had grown unchecked, an old wooden swing with slightly rusted chains, the wooden seat stained by time and rain. It looked like someone had used it a long time ago and then no one had touched it since. Chioma went straight to the swing, touching the wood with her index finger, with the caution of someone testing something that might break. "Is this swing yours, Chief Emeka?" He was sitting on the bench by the pond, looked at the object as if seeing it for the first time after a long time. It was hers. A pause. The garden grew quieter. Even the carp seemed to stop swimming for a moment. "It was my wife's. She liked to sit here in the afternoon. She said from here you could hear the birds better than from anywhere else in the house." Chioma turned to him with that concentrated seriousness she reserved for important things. "Where is she?" Adana closed her eyes. "She died," Chief Emeka said. There was no bitterness in his voice. There was something harder to describe, an acceptance that took years to learn and that still hurt occasionally, like an old fracture that aches when it's about to rain. Chioma was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry." Chief Emeka looked at her. "Thank you." The girl went back to examining the swing. "The chains are rusty." "They are. It needs fixing." "It does." Chioma looked at him firmly, with the same seriousness as an engineer evaluating a compromised structure. "Then fix it." Adana brought her hand to her forehead with the delicacy of someone trying to ward off a headache that was already arriving. "My daughter." But Chief Emeka looked at the swing for a long moment. He looked at the creeper that had grown over it, at the chains he had allowed to rust, at the seat he had allowed to be spoiled by the rain and sun, and by 5 years of neglect. Then he turned to Pa James, who was observing everything from the veranda, with absolute discretion. "James, call Malam Yusuf first thing tomorrow morning. Ask him to take care of the swing. New chains, treated wood, whatever it needs." The butler nodded with a lightness that wasn't professional. It was genuine. "Immediately, sir." Chioma smiled and walked back to the bench by the pond, sitting next to Chief Emeka with the naturalness of someone who does it every day, as if that bench had been made exactly for 2 people of that size. "Do you live here alone?" "I do." The girl frowned with that specific frown when something doesn't make sense to her. "That's very sad." Adana covered her face with both hands. "My daughter, for goodness sake, why do you say that?" Chief Emeka asked. "Because big houses should have lots of children. That way the house doesn't look like a museum." Chief Emeka looked at her. "You think it looks like a museum?" "It does." Chioma swung her small feet on the bench with the carefree attitude of someone completely at ease. "A beautiful museum. But a museum." The billionaire was silent for a moment, looking at the mansion behind him. And suddenly that place seemed even emptier than he remembered. Quieter, further from anything that had once been called home. "If you want," Chioma said in the voice of someone making a reasonable business proposal, "I can come and play here sometimes." Adana's eyes widened. "Chioma, it would be good for the house." Chief Emeka looked at the girl for a long moment, then at the mansion, then back at the girl. "Perhaps," he finally said in a voice that came out softer than he planned, "that's not such a bad idea." Chioma smiled, a smile so bright it seemed to change the temperature of the entire garden. But from above, from one of the second-floor windows, someone was observing the scene with crossed arms and cold eyes. Ngozi Okoro, and her expression made it very clear that little girl was not welcome in that house. From the second-floor window, Ngozi Okoro observed the garden with an expression that was anything but kind. Her eyes were fixed on Chief Emeka and the little girl who was now running around the pond, chasing a yellow butterfly with open hands, laughing in a way that echoed through the entire garden and reached the closed window. Ngozi crossed her arms. Unbelievable. Beside her was her brother, Chinedu Okoro, hands in his pockets, also looking down with an expression that mixed confusion with something he was still trying to name. "Who is that girl?" The new cleaner's daughter. Ngozi's voice had the tone of someone describing something mildly repulsive. "She came into Uncle's meeting yesterday, said he was her father." Chinedu raised his eyebrows. "Really? And Uncle Emeka didn't send her away immediately?" Ngozi turned to him with a look that said everything without needing words. If he had, she wouldn't be in the garden now. Chinedu was silent, observing the scene below. There was something different about Chief Emeka that afternoon. His posture was different. His shoulders, usually tense in a straight line that resembled a man preparing for permanent battle, were relaxed. His expression, usually closed in on itself like a locked door, was open in a way Chinedu couldn't remember ever seeing. "Are you seeing this?" "Seeing what?" "Uncle Emeka." Nodzi looked at her brother. "What about him?" Chinedu was silent for a moment, like someone trying to articulate something surprising with the right words. "He's smiling." Ngozi looked back at the garden, and for a moment, she felt something she didn't like to feel at all: unease. Because in the last 5 years, no one had seen Chief Emeka Okoro truly smile. Not a meeting smile, not a protocol smile, not that movement of the lips executives make when they need to appear pleasant, a real smile. And that was a very serious problem. "This has to stop," Ngozi said. "Stop? It's just a child." "That's exactly the problem," Ngozi said, looking at her brother. "That she is a child." Ngozi turned fully to her brother with the carefully constructed patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone who should understand by themselves. Who, in 2 days, did what no one else could do in 5 years. The silence between them was heavy, because both knew what was at stake. The Okoro Group was enormous. Companies, properties, investment funds, holdings in medium-sized businesses spread across the country. Chief Emeka had no children, no direct heirs. That had always meant something specific and important. Ngozi had built her entire life on that premise. The plans she made, the decisions she took, the patience with which she endured her uncle's silence. Everything had been tolerated with the quiet certainty that in the end, time would play in her favor. But if Chief Emeka decided that that little girl was part of his life, "What do you propose to do?" Chinedu asked. Ngozi walked to the table in the private sitting room, opened the drawer, and took out a thin folder. "First, we will take the simplest route." Chinedu waited. "If the mother loses her job," Ngozi said, "there will be no reason for her to come back to this house." That night, after 10 o'clock, Ngozi was still awake. Sitting at the table in the private room, cell phone in hand, she dialed a number few knew. "Dr. Adiola," she said when the call was answered, in a low voice of someone who doesn't want to be heard in the corridors. "I need a discreet consultation about patrimonial succession. I want to understand what legally happens when an asset holder decides to include a third party without kinship, by adoption, by recognition, by any other available legal means." The voice on the other end murmured something. "I know," Ngozi replied. "That's why I'm calling now, before any decision is made. I want to know all the possibilities and all the legal impediments. I need to be prepared." When she hung up, she looked out the window at the dark garden of the mansion. And when it's all over, she thought silently, that girl will go back exactly where she belongs. Downstairs, in the illuminated kitchen, completely unaware of anything, Adana and Chioma laughed together as the jowl of rice warmed on the stove and Chioma tried to teach her mother the names of all the fish in the pond. The next morning, at the Okoro mansion, began like any other. The sun illuminated the perfectly manicured gardens. The staff greeted each other with that professional good morning of people at work. The distant sound of the courtyard fountain filled the air with a calm that was, as always, deceptive. But inside the house's administrative office, Ngozi Okoro was sitting opposite the administrator, with a folder on the table and a very clear objective in mind. "Mr. Adebayo," she said in a firm and calm tone, "we need to discuss an employee." The man looked up from the papers he was reviewing. "About whom, Miss Ngozi?" Ngozi placed the open folder on the table, facing him. "Adana Okori." The administrator frowned. "Has something happened to her?" "Several things, actually." Ngozi pointed to some documents with a well-manicured finger. "Late arrivals, interruptions during work hours, improper use of the house's spaces during working hours." The administrator reviewed the papers carefully. "These reports are quite minor, Miss Ngozi. None of them, in isolation, would justify more serious action. Perhaps isolated? No." Ngozi crossed her arms with a calmness that was more frightening than any declared irritation. "But when they accumulate, they form a pattern, and patterns of inappropriate conduct affect the environment of the entire team." The man hesitated. "Miss, Chief Emeka usually personally approves dismissals involving household staff. He is very careful with that kind of decision. This is not a major dismissal." Ngozi leaned slightly forward. "It's a routine administrative decision. You have the authority for this. You always have." A pause. "I just need you to exercise that authority today." The administrator took a deep breath. "You want me to dismiss her?" Ngozi replied without hesitation, like someone confirming a coffee order. "Today." In the kitchen, Adana was finishing organizing some utensils while Kioma drew in a corner of the table with the colored pencils Pa James had left there the day before. Such a small and generous gesture that Adana had stared at the pencils for a long moment before being able to say thank you. "Mummy," Chioma said, holding up the paper. "Today I'm going to do a portrait of Chief Emeka." Adana smiled tiredly. "Another one? This one will be better." "Why?" "Because now I know how he smiles." Adana looked at her daughter with a mixture of tenderness and worry that had become her standard emotional state that week. There was something in Chioma's expression when she spoke of Chief Emeka, a quiet certainty, a silent belonging that at once warmed and frightened her. At that moment, the administrator appeared at the kitchen door. "Mrs. Okori." Adana raised her head. "Yes, Mr. Adebayo." The man seemed uncomfortable. It wasn't the discomfort of someone ashamed of doing something wrong. It was the kind of discomfort of someone who knows they are following questionable orders but can't prove they are questionable. "I need to speak with you for a moment." Chioma looked up. "Can I listen?" Adana gently stroked her hair. "Wait here a second, darling." They walked to the corridor. The administrator sighed deeply before speaking, like someone preparing to say something they don't want to say. "Mrs. Okori, I regret to inform you that today will be your last day working in this house." Adana's world stopped, not dramatically, but silently, like when the light goes out and the room suddenly goes dark. "What? We have received reports about your professional conduct that." "But that's not true." Her voice came out firmer than she expected, firm in the way it appears when the injustice is great enough to overcome fear. "I know what I did and what I didn't do. I never came late. I never left my work halfway. I never. The decision has already been made, ma'am." Adana felt the ground disappear beneath her. "I need this job, my daughter, the bills, the rent. I don't have any other income right now. I need some time to. I'm sorry." In the corridor, the administrator's voice came muffled. Chioma appeared at the kitchen door. She had heard. Her eyes were full of a confusion that hurt more than any cry. "Are we leaving?" Adana didn't know what to answer for a moment. The administrator lowered his gaze. "Yes." The girl looked at the unfinished drawing still in her hands. The portrait of Chief Emeka with the smile she had learned to draw, the sentence she had begun to write below and hadn't finished. "So you don't get sad, but I promised I'd come back tomorrow." The silence in the corridor was devastating, and on the second floor of the mansion, Ngozi Okoro observed the scene from the balustrade, with an expression of someone who had just seen the chessboard exactly as she wanted it. Her plan was working. The mansion corridor seemed longer than usual as Adana walked back to the kitchen. Each step was heavier than the last. It wasn't the first time she had lost a job. She had gone through other dismissals at the clothing store where she worked after Chioma was born, at the estate where she cleaned for 2 years before the contract ended. Life had taught her that doors close, that others open, that surviving is a skill learned through practice and refined through pain. But this time it hurt in a different way, because she had seen something in her daughter during those days that she hadn't seen in a long time. Real joy. The kind of joy that doesn't need to be faked to seem real, that appears on a child's face before they even know they are happy. When she entered the kitchen, Chioma was standing by the table, holding the drawing she had made. "Mummy," she asked in a very low voice, with that voice of someone trying to be brave, but not quite succeeding. "Are we really leaving?" "Yes, my darling." The girl looked at the paper. It was Chief Emeka Okoro with a huge smile, and below the portrait, in crooked childish letters, the sentence she had started and not finished. "So you don't get sad, but I promised I'd come back tomorrow." Adana took a deep breath. "Sometimes promises don't just depend on us." Chioma was silent for a few seconds. Then she looked up with a small but firm determination. "Then, I need to say a proper goodbye." Adana hesitated. She knew it would be best to leave without drawing more attention, to go out the back door, catch a bus on Lekki Epe Expressway, move on. It was what life had taught her to do, move on without looking back for too long. But she also knew that her daughter would not easily forget that place, not as long as there was an unfulfilled promise. "All right," she finally said in a voice that came out more tired than she wanted, "but just for a moment." Meanwhile, in his second-floor office, Chief Emeka Okoro had documents open in front of him, but couldn't read a single line. There had been a strange feeling since morning, something he couldn't name precisely, but which prevented him from concentrating on anything. Then, there was a knock on the door. "Come in." The door opened slowly. Chioma entered, walked a few steps into the office, her small shoes making a minimal sound on the marble, and stopped in the center of the room. Chief Emeka looked up from the document. His expression changed immediately. The girl wasn't smiling. "Hello, Chioma. What's wrong?" She lowered her gaze to the drawing in her hands. "I came to say goodbye." Chief Emeka frowned. "Say goodbye?" "Yes." The girl held up the paper. "This is for you. I didn't finish writing, but the important part is there." Chief Emeka carefully took the drawing. It was him smiling, and underneath, in crooked, childish letters, "So you don't get sad ever again." Chief Emeka felt a knot in his chest that had no name in business books. "Why are you saying goodbye?" Chioma replied with that simplicity she had a knack for using exactly at the moments when it carried the most weight. "Because we can't stay here anymore." Silence filled the office. "Who said that?" "A man spoke to my mummy, said we were dismissed." Chief Emeka's face became serious, very serious, with the specific seriousness of someone who has just understood what happened and is precisely calculating what comes next. "Who made that decision?" Chioma shrugged her small shoulders. "I don't know, but I wanted to tell you something." "Before I go," Chief Emeka observed her with total attention. "What?" The girl took 2 steps towards him, stopped, and then said something that made the billionaire completely quiet. "Thank you for smiling." Pause. "Because when you smile, you don't look so lonely anymore." The silence was deep and long. Chief Emeka was speechless for a time he couldn't measure. Then he asked in a voice that came out lower than he intended, "Where is your mother now?" "Packing our things." The girl turned to the door. "Bye, Chief Emeka. Thank you for the visit yesterday and for the swing." But before she reached the door, Chief Emeka spoke. "Chioma." She turned. The billionaire stood at his full height, a height that usually intimidated, that usually defined hierarchies before any word was spoken. He stood up and said in a voice that was not that of a billionaire, but of a man, "No one is going anywhere." Chioma blinked. "What?" Chief Emeka walked to the door with those steps that everyone in Okoro Towers knew. The steps of someone who has already made a decision and is merely executing it. "I think it's time to clarify some things." The sound of Chief Emeka Okoro's footsteps echoed through the second-floor corridor with a precision that was almost musical. It wasn't a hurried step, but it had a firmness that every employee in the mansion had learned to recognize in the 23 years the house operated under that name. It was the same step he took when he was about to close an important deal, the same one he used when he made a decision no one dared to contest. The step of a man who knows exactly where he is going and why. In the first-floor living room, Adana was finishing putting the last few things into a small fabric bag. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from that specific tension of trying to maintain control of something that had been spiraling out of control for too long. Chioma was sitting near the door, her gaze lowered. "Mummy," she asked in a very low voice, almost a whisper, "are we going to have to live at Auntie Bisi's house?" Adana forced a smile. "We'll see, okay? Don't worry about that now. I know Auntie Bisi's house is small. She won't like it much." Adana opened her mouth to reply, but a firm voice interrupted everything. "No one is going anywhere." Both turned immediately. Chief Emeka Okoro was at the entrance of the room with Chioma by his side, holding the unfinished drawing. Adana felt something she couldn't immediately name. It was relief and fear at the same time, like avoiding a fall but having your heart race long afterward. The billionaire walked towards them. "Who gave the order to dismiss you?" Adana hesitated. "Mr. Adebayo, the house administrator." "And who gave him the order?" The silence was sufficient. Chief Emeka looked up at the stairs and, exactly at that moment, as if having rehearsed the perfect timing of an appearance, Ngozi Okoro emerged on the second floor. She had heard everything. "I did," she said with calculated tranquility, resting her hands on the balustrade lightly, based on behavioral reports that were in the employee's file. "It was a decision within my administrative purview." She began to descend the stairs with slow, deliberate steps, each step on the marble echoing through the hall. Chief Emeka did not raise his voice, but his gaze went to her like a straight line, without deviation, without concession. "Since when do you have authority over the staff of this house?" "Since someone needs to." She reached the first floor, her heels resonating on the marble with a precision that had something of a declaration of intent. "Uncle Emeka, this house has order. Employees work. They don't bring children to play in the garden as if it were a neighborhood park. They don't occupy spaces that are not theirs." Adana bowed her head. "She's right, sir. I understand completely. We don't want to cause any problems. But we like it here," Chioma said with the devastating simplicity of her 6 years. The mere fact that the girl spoke at that moment made Ngozi miss a step for a fraction of a second. A small hesitation, but one that Pa James in the corridor noticed. Chief Emeka looked at the girl, then at Adana. You are not dismissed. Ngozi raised an eyebrow. Uncle Emeka, she continues to work here? This is. And her daughter is welcome in this house. Ngozi was silent for a moment, internally reorganizing her strategy. Then she took a deep breath and tried another approach, one that had worked with lawyers, with administrators, with people who understood the weight of money and what was at stake when it was too much. Uncle Emeka, she said in a softer, closer voice, with a tone that intended to sound like genuine concern. I understand that you are feeling lonely. I truly understand, but I need to tell you something, with all due respect. You are one of the richest men in the country. People will always try to get close to you in creative ways, especially those who have nothing to lose and much to gain. The comment fell like a stone in the silence of the room. Adana bowed her head because those were exactly the words she had feared hearing since the first day. The words she heard in her own head when she wondered what others were thinking about her. About Chioma, about what all this proximity might look like from the outside. She's right, Adana whispered. We don't want any problems. She gently took Chioma's hand. Let's go, darling. But before they could take a step towards the door, Chief Emeka spoke. No one is going anywhere. This time there was something different in the firmness of his voice. It wasn't the firmness of a boss. It was the firmness of a man who had decided to stop escaping something that had been too close for too long to continue pretending it was far away. Adana stopped. Ngozi let out a short laugh of someone losing patience, but still trying to maintain appearances. You still don't understand what's happening here, Uncle Emeka? I understand perfectly. Then you know what this woman is doing? I do. Pause. She is raising her daughter alone, with what she has, in the way she can, and doing it very well. The words occupied the space of the room in a way no strategy of Ngozi's had managed. The billionaire walked slowly to the center of the room. Then he looked at each person present, at Adana, with downcast eyes but shoulders raised, at Chioma, with wide, attentive eyes, at Pa James, who had appeared discreetly at the corridor entrance without making a sound, at the two staff members who had stopped at the back, not knowing whether they should leave, and finally at Ngozi. I want everyone to hear what I'm going to say. The silence was total. For the past 5 years, this house has become a museum. The corridors were cold, meals were eaten alone. There was no noise, no mess, nothing that a house needs to be a real home. Pause. I left it that way. I chose it that way because it was easier than feeling. Pa James in the corridor was completely motionless. And then a 6-year-old girl walked into my boardroom and called me daddy. Chief Emeka looked at Chioma. Everyone expected me to send her away, to defend order, protocol, the professional environment, and the distance I had built with such care for so long. A small pause. But this girl did something no one had been able to do in a very long time. He looked at her with an expression that was nothing calculated. She reminded me what it feels like to be alive. The silence in the room was the kind that doesn't need to be broken immediately. Ngozi had her arms crossed, her eyes cold, but there was something different in her expression now, something that resembled the understanding that the ground had shifted completely and she hadn't noticed in time. And now you come to tell me that these two people don't belong here. They don't belong to our family, Ngozi said with the last card she had. Chief Emeka took a few seconds, then said something no one expected to hear. Perhaps that is the problem. Ngozi frowned. What do you mean? That for years this family forgot something very important. He looked at Chioma, then at Adana. Family is not defined only by blood. He turned his eyes to Ngozi. Decisions also define. Love also defines. Ngozi let out an incredulous laugh, the last armor she had. Now, you're going to adopt any child who shows up in your life? No. Chief Emeka took a deep breath and uttered the words that would change everything. But I'm going to give my surname to this one. The impact was immediate and absolute. What? Ngozi's voice came out sharp, losing for the first time the veneer of composure she had spent years building. The staff exchanged glances in silence. Adana was paralyzed, Chioma's hand still in hers, unable to speak. Sir, you can't be. Blood doesn't define who your family is, Chief Emeka said with a calm that was the opposite of what anyone in the room was feeling. Decisions do. He looked at Chioma. The girl didn't fully understand the words of law and inheritance and surname that the adults were using, but she understood enough. Does that mean I can stay? Chief Emeka smiled. Yes. And for the first time in many years, the Okoro mansion was filled with something it had completely forgotten how to feel. Hope. The hall became completely silent after Chief Emeka's words. No one moved. No one breathed properly. I will give her my surname. Ngozi was the first to regain her voice. But what came out was no longer strategy. It was pure rage, with a thin layer of dignity over it, the last reserve of a war she had lost. You are giving away our family name, the name our grandfather built, with decades of work, which our father defended with what he had, to a girl who appeared 2 days ago and whom you barely know." Chief Emeka did not raise his voice. He never did. He pointed gently to Chioma. "I am giving it to someone who gave me back something that had been lost for a very long time. And what is that?" There was genuine curiosity in Ngozi's question beneath the anger. She needed to understand, even if she didn't want to. Chief Emeka paused. He looked at the girl who was watching him with wide, serious eyes, waiting with that patience children have when they know the moment is important, the capacity to feel again. The silence was deep and full. Ngozi opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then, for the first and only time in that story, said nothing. She turned and left, her heels resonating on the marble, each beat a little faster than the last, until the sound disappeared down the second-floor corridor. Chinedu, who had appeared at the bottom of the stairs unnoticed, looked at his brother for a long moment. Then he looked at Chioma, then at the corridor where his sister had disappeared, and slowly, without saying a word, he too withdrew. Chioma looked at Chief Emeka. "Your surname is very heavy." The billionaire smiled with a gentleness that Pa James, in 23 years in the house, had never seen on that face. "No." He leaned slightly towards her, "but the heart that carries it, yes." Weeks later, the Okoro mansion was no longer the silent place everyone remembered. For the first time in years, there was noise in the corridors. There was laughter in the kitchen. Quick footsteps in the garden, the creaking of the restored swing that Chioma used every afternoon before dinner. The new chains sparkled when the sun hit them. The treated wood still smelled of the varnish Malam Yusuf had carefully applied on a Saturday morning, while Chioma sat on the grass, watching and asking questions about each step of the process. The staff had grown accustomed to seeing the girl running through the spaces that were once always empty, drawing in the kitchen, sitting next to Chief Emeka on the bench by the pond, leafing through the books on the office shelf, with that seriousness of someone doing something important. The house no longer looked like a museum, it finally looked like a home. Pa James had noticed that his employer had started coming home earlier from work. He didn't comment to anyone, but he noticed and kept that observation with the same care with which he kept everything he understood about that house. He had also noticed that Chief Emeka had asked the kitchen to always keep fresh fruits on the counter because Chioma liked mango, and that he had ordered a collection of illustrated children's books, which was carefully stacked in the corner of the shelf next to the architecture and business books. The business books were still there, but now they had company. That particular afternoon, the sky over Ikoyi had that burnt orange color that only appears on cloudless days. The kind of twilight that makes the city seem more beautiful than usual, more habitable, more human. Chief Emeka was sitting on the wooden bench by the pond. He had learned in those weeks to recognize the sound of Chioma's footsteps approaching through the garden, her small shoes tapping on the stone path, then silencing on the grass. "Daddy." The word came out with the naturalness of someone who had said it 1,000 times, and there was no reason in the world for it to be otherwise. Chief Emeka looked up. "Yes." Chioma ran up and stopped beside the bench, holding up a paper folded into quarters, with that specific care of someone carrying something they had spent the whole day thinking about. "I made a new one. Let me see." She carefully unfolded it. It was a drawing of 3 people holding hands in front of a big house. The house had windows with flowers on the windowsill that the real mansion didn't have, but which Chioma had decided it should have. And above the drawing, in letters that were already becoming straighter, firmer, more like what she intended, "Us." Chief Emeka looked at the paper for a long time, then raised his gaze. Adana was standing a few meters away, leaning against the veranda column, with the late afternoon light hitting her face from the side. There was something in that expression that Chief Emeka had also learned to recognize. It wasn't simple joy. It was the joy of someone not used to being allowed to be happy, and slowly learning that permission had already been granted. "Thank you," she said in a low voice. Chief Emeka shook his head. "No." He looked at Chioma, who had already sat beside him, and was swinging her feet on the bench with the ease of someone who has belonged to a place for a long time. "Thank you." "Why?" Chioma asked, her head tilted to the side. Chief Emeka looked at the sky. The light was changing from orange to purple, the kind of transition that lasts briefly and is therefore more precious. At the edge of the pond, one of the golden carp jumped out of the water for a second and returned, leaving a slowly expanding circle of ripples. Chief Emeka took a deep breath. "Because you taught me that being a billionaire doesn't mean having everything." He put his arm around her shoulders. "It means finding the people who make your life worthwhile." Chioma rested her head on his arm. The sun disappeared behind the trees, and the garden fell into that quiet twilight that precedes night, the kind of quietude that is not loneliness. It is peace. 3 months later, at a registry office in Ikoyi, the clerk called the name aloud for the final confirmation of the process. Chioma Okoro. The girl raised her hand with enormous enthusiasm, the sleeve of her Sunday blouse slipping down her elbow. Present. Some people in the room smiled. Pa James, sitting in a chair at the back, took a handkerchief from his suit pocket with all the discretion his position had taught him. Chief Emeka, beside Chioma, looked at the signed paper with the still crooked and still adorable handwriting of a child who was learning that her name had just gained another syllable and, with it, a place in the world that no one could ever take away. And he smiled unreservedly, without calculation, without the armor he had carried for 5 years, and which had been disarmed, piece by piece, by a 6-year-old girl who had run in through the wrong door on an important meeting day. Adanna, on Chioma's other side, held her daughter's hand tightly, like someone who won't let go anymore. If this story touched your heart, write here in the comments the name of a typical food from your city. It could be jollof rice from Lagos, suya from Abuja, amala from Ibadan, afang soup from Calabar, tuwo shinkafa from Kano, akara from Abeokuta, ofada rice from Ogun, or anything else that represents the place where you live. Your comment helps these stories reach more people across Nigeria. And if you like stories that move, inspire, and remind us what truly matters, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to not miss any. Because sometimes family doesn't come by blood, it comes by love.